Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another Learning Lunch hosted by Format Approved. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Online Education with Format Approved, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Learning Lunch is titled, Reduce Your HIPAA Exposure with These 5 Steps. We're joined today by Matt LaMaster of Advantage Technologies, an IT company that specializes in providing HIPAA-compliant technology solutions to dental practices. Matt has extensive real-world experience in implementing and supporting HIPAA compliance programs, and we're honored to share his expertise with you today. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Thanks, Brian.
Before we go on, I just want to take care of a few housekeeping notes. I'll let the audience look at the questions we're going to cover today while I just discuss a few things you need to know as we proceed. Remember that you can ask questions of our presenter at any time during today's session by entering them into the chat area. We'll generally save those questions for the end of our presentation, where our presenter will answer as many of those questions as time allows. If we do run out of time, or if there's detailed questions, answers to those questions can be submitted via email, or we'll give our presenter a chance to email you separately if we run out of time. Also remember that all registered attendees of today's session will receive an email with links to both the slides of this presentation and the recorded version of the event. So if you happen to be listening to the recording in the future, we always provide that to anyone who registers for these events because we realize that some people are not able to attend a live one. All right, so that takes care of the housekeeping. Let's get into the presentation. So Matt, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the law. What do providers need to understand about HIPAA and the HITECH Act?
Sure, Brian. So actually, and I apologize, before we start out, Brian, on the slide kind of introducing me, it did mention that I am an attorney. I am licensed to practice in Michigan and Florida. And one of the things I wanted to mention is, although I'm an attorney, we are going to be giving some real practical advice here. And we are obviously talking about the law to some extent. And so I wanted to make sure everybody understood that I am not your attorney. And although I'm here to help, we do not have an attorney-client relationship. But I wanted to mention that, Brian, before we got started. So
that's a great point.
My obligation as an attorney. But I want to say, obviously, thank you for everybody joining us today. And let's just hop right in here. What does the law say about HIPAA and HITECH? I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about the history because I know personally I've been through a lot of these webinars and trainings, and there's really two things that a lot of these trainings do. They talk about the history forever, and then they scare you and they talk about how much money and how many fines are out there. So I am going to talk about the history, but really only to give you an understanding of what we need to know when we start talking about the 5 steps that you need to take. So the first thing is HIPAA. It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it was enacted in 1996. There was a few reasons why HIPAA was enacted. A couple of the reasons really had to do with insurance billing and also some portability of employees when they would transfer employers in keeping insurance. That really doesn't have a ton to do with us, so I'm not going to dive into that. But there are a couple things that we do need to talk about, and that is the privacy rule from 2003 and the security rule in 2005. So what HIPAA originally did, it discussed some general ideas about securing and keeping patients' information private. In 2003, the privacy rule's major goal was to assure that individuals' health information was properly protected and kept private while still allowing dental offices and medical providers to provide good health care and the communication that had to be had between different offices and the patients. But really, the whole idea was to keep patient information private. And so the privacy rule gave us a couple of things, and the first one was it talked about protected health information. I'm sure that everybody on this call is familiar with the term protected health information. If you're not, basically it is the information that, the personal information about your patients. So their social security number, their names, their medical history, things like that. And so the acronym for it, for protected health information, is PHI. The other thing that it talked about was who is subject to HIPAA. Well, what they said was that covered entities, quote-unquote covered entities, are subject to HIPAA. So a covered entity is really anybody who transmits, creates, generates patient protected health information, or that PHI. And I will tell you, and as most of you all know, dental practices are covered entities. So we all know here, pretty much everybody on the call, if you're a dental provider, you are a covered entity, and the privacy rule said that we need to keep protected health information private. The next thing, real quick, was the security rule. The security rule basically said that covered entities, are required to maintain reasonable and appropriate administrative, technical, and physical safeguards. So those three things: administrative, technical, and physical safeguards for protecting the PHI. It told the covered entities that they must do 4 things. This is really important. The first is to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the PHI. The second was identify and protect against reasonably anticipated threats. And the third one was protect against reasonably anticipated impermissible uses or disclosures. And the last one, which really hits home for all the providers out there listening, is that you would need to ensure compliance through your workforce, and really making sure that everybody and your team understands that. So that's HIPAA and the 2 rules that came directly after HIPAA. The third, I guess the second larger act is the HITECH Act, and that really concerns the technical part and the technology portion of transmitting PHI. So as an IT provider, and Advantage Technology is the company I currently work for, as an IT provider, we are generally most concerned about the HITECH Act and how that applies with HIPAA. The HITECH Act did additionally, besides just talking about the technical concerns out there, it also strengthened some of the civil and criminal enforcement of HIPAA, and it created 4 categories of violations, and it also put a maximum penalty of $1.5 million for violations. So the last thing here on the list is the HIPAA Omnibus final rule. And I want to stop for a moment because I always think it's really funny. You know, people talk about the omnibus, and they think omnibus is just some crazy word that somebody made up. From a legal standpoint, the definition is really no more than a bunch of documents that are compiled together that create basically a book of rules. And so when we think about omnibus, it's exactly what it is. It is a compilation of HIPAA, the privacy rule, the security rule, and HITECH. It pulls all those in together, answers a lot of questions that were out there about both of those, and provides some clarification on business associates like ourselves, Advantage Technologies. It also formally adopted the penalty scheme that I'm sure you guys have heard a ton about, and how big these violations can be. It also gave patients some extended rights, and it required some modifications to the Notice of Privacy Practices, which on the next slide we'll get into a little bit, but it's basically that form that you have your patients fill out when they walk into the office. And I'm not going to go through every single one of those modifications today on this call, but certainly if you're more interested, Brian or myself can answer some of those questions for you. Brian, I know that was really long-winded, but
it really wasn't.
History, and there's a ton more there, but I think for our purposes, that's going to get us to where we need to be in terms of talking about these 5 steps.
Well, I think it's just a nice view of the landscape, and let's talk a little bit about the consequences then of this change in the law. How have these changes in the law through HIPAA and HITECH, how did they affect how a provider runs their practice?
Absolutely. So in the introduction as well, Brian said I have some really, some practical experience in a dental practice. I was actually running a 6-location practice in Michigan for quite some time. And so from my experience, and also obviously understanding the law and now being on the IT provider side, here are 4 things that you can expect from HIPAA and HITECH and how they're going to affect your office. The first is, obviously now it's a legal obligation that you have to protect your patient's personal information. You can be subject to fines and violations. Generally, that's the one that's talked about the most. I think we all know about that. And, I know it scares you, but really from a practical standpoint, sometimes you kind of need that to get moving on taking some of these steps. The next one was increased patient paperwork. I mean, come on, we all know that having them fill out the notice of privacy practices and having the questions and printing those things, especially if you have a lot of patients, printing those things all the time, it just seems like more paperwork sometimes. And it is, but that's one thing that has happened because of HIPAA and HITECH. And also, obviously, the huge documentation and policies and procedures that you have to keep behind your desk. So the third thing that we have on here is the office design. And really your workflow process as you go through your dental office and you're seeing your patients, you're getting them checked in as they walk through your office, making sure that they don't have access or they can't view patient charts and patient names, and they can't see the screen when you are, the computer screen when you're taking x-rays or doing a procedure. It's changed the office design. And if it hasn't changed the office design for you, quite honestly, you probably need to look at that and take that into account as people walk through your office. And it's not just the patients. If you have, let's say you have me walking through your office, you need to figure out ways to protect that information with the design. The last one here is the employee procedures. You're all on the call, obviously, to understand some practical steps that you can take to become compliant. A lot of that has to do with, first of all, training you at the level that you're at. I would imagine that a lot of you are probably office administrators, practice managers, or even doctors. And so you are going to likely be tasked at the end of this with putting some of these procedures in place, and then training and so on and so forth, which we'll talk about later. But Brian, to me, these are the 4 real ways that HIPAA and HITECH have affected the dental office.
So I love this because, you did a great job of covering the legal aspects of it quickly. You said you were long-winded, but you weren't at all. So you covered that, but here we get to the real practical steps. So what are the things then that people need to do to become compliant?
Absolutely. So I've got 5 here, and these are fairly high level. I mean, this is taking a 3,000 3,000-foot view at compliance. Number 1, do me a favor, and when we're done with this call, you are going to have a security compliance officer named if you don't already have one. We're going to go through this a little bit more in depth, but you need to name a security compliance officer. It's required by HIPAA. You're going to check that off your list, and you're going to have that when you're done with this call. The second thing is perform a security risk analysis. Another thing that's required by HIPAA, and in fact, we're going to go through that a little bit today. We're not going to dive into it too much because, quite frankly, there's some work involved in it. We'll talk about it, and if you need help, your IT provider may be able to help you. And I believe that Format Approved also has some programs out there to help you with the security risk analysis. But it's required. And when you do that, it is the gateway to understanding compliance and understanding what you need to do as an office to become compliant. The third thing is secure your technology. I'll talk about 5 steps inside of securing your technology that you're going to be able to implement, and your IT provider or maybe yourself can implement those. That's going to really help protect your patient information. The fourth one is have a backup and disaster recovery plan. This is important, and it is required by HIPAA, but it's also something to protect your business. Your business is really important. That's obviously why you're on here, because you're, want to make sure you're compliant. Well, you also want to make money, and if something happens and a disaster happens, you have a plan in place. It's kind of cool that HIPAA actually requires you to do that. I don't know if they care about your business. I think it's obviously more that they care about the patient information being protected. Nonetheless, we'll talk about that. The last one here is you need to conduct training. This webinar is not, a full training for you, but we will talk about what training looks like and the steps that you need to take, and give you some resources to start training your security compliance officer, and then also your team members.
All right, well, let's go into these 5 steps and dive a little deeper on in terms of what are the requirements and what do people need to understand. So let's start with the first one. Why is it important to name a security compliance officer?
Yeah, so Brian, the security compliance officer is the person in your office, in the dental office, that is going to be in charge of making sure that the office is compliant. It is required by Section 164.308A2, and it is considered a part of the administrative safeguards. So what the security compliance officer does, and you really may be asking yourself, obviously, who is it, what is it, and where do I start? If you don't already have one, the security compliance officer is charged with developing, maintaining, and implementing organizational policies and procedures, conducting training programs, reviewing conduct of employees with access to the PHI, and then administering reviews of the company's security program ongoing. So I told you a little bit earlier, one of my goals today is by the end of this call, and actually what I'd like to be able to do is by the end of this slide, is I want you to be able to name a security compliance officer. And so with these 4 things in mind, I want you to stop, take a look at yourself, ask yourself, is the security compliance officer going to be me? Or is there somebody else in my organization that I can name as a security compliance officer? Once you do that, that person is going to be tasked with making sure that you are compliant. And they are basically going to be going through, which is on the next slide, and we're not ready for that yet, but it's the risk analysis. And they are tasked with making sure that your team members are trained, making sure that they do the risk analysis, and again, reviewing the conduct and your company's security programs, throughout the year, and generally every 6 months, reviewing everything. That's an ongoing process. So this person really needs to have some organizational abilities, and as anything, if you're going to name somebody and put them in a position, they need to have some drive and some interest to do it. So, Brian, does that answer the question, on the security compliance officer, or is there something you think may need to be discussed a little bit more there?
Well, I think this should be clear, but I just want to add, in most organizations, certainly smaller ambulatory organizations, this isn't someone, it's their full-time job. This is typically, could be a practice manager, or it could be a clinician who takes this on as an additional responsibility. So it's not someone who does this as a full-time gig. HIPAA doesn't require that. Rather, it's that you've got to name sort of the point person and the champion for HIPAA to make sure that the compliance program is being followed.
Absolutely. And I guess I should add a couple more things here, which is on this last part of the slide, the bottom part, is that the security compliance officer really looks at 3 larger policies that are in place and safeguards. And the first one is the administrative safeguards, the second one is physical safeguards, and the third one is the technical safeguards. So as you look at naming your security compliance officer, again, you do want to make sure that they have organizational skills, which from the administrative safeguards is important, because what they're going to be doing is they're going to be implementing the HIPAA documentation that is required, and we will talk about that a little bit more later in this session. they need to make sure that all of your business associates, so for us, Advantage Technologies, we're an IT provider for dental practices, we are considered a business associate. Your security compliance officer needs to make sure that you have business associate agreements signed with all of your business associates, third parties. They need to keep those. They need to keep those in a folder. They need to keep them organized. And they also need to make sure that all the policies and procedures are in place and that the training is in place, and keeping that organized from an administrative safeguard. And from the physical and technical safeguards, again, we are going to talk about some of the technology that's required, but they do need to have some understanding of technology. And obviously, again, Advantage Technologies, an IT provider, we do train and help our clients understand the technology that's required from HIPAA, but ultimately they need to have a little bit of understanding there, or the ability to learn. So those are some really big things that that you need to look for in naming your security compliance officer.
I would just add to that, Matt, quickly, that you were talking about administrative. There are technical aspects of HIPAA, of course, but sometimes we say compliance is administrative. And I think people are often surprised that more than half of the requirements are really administrative requirements, things like making sure those policies and procedures are in place and that they're actually followed, making sure that the training's been completed, which we're going to talk about more. But I think that organizational aspect you were talking about is really critical here, and people don't always realize that it's really kind of an organizational and administrative commitment to get compliance right.
Right. And so, Brian, I know we had talked about earlier having everybody on this call name their security compliance officer. It is a requirement. So if you name them, you can mark a check off your list. So I would ask, and I think, Brian, if you have if you have the polling question available, do you want to go ahead and poll
Sure.
The audience now and see if they have one? So.
All right, you can go ahead and vote there.
Yep.
All right, it looks like most folks have voted. Let's give it a few more seconds.
Oh, and by the way, we do get some results, but we don't give them to the HHS.
Yes.
Or the OCR.
Yeah, don't worry.
But this is not a test.
That's right. We're not wired in, so don't worry about this. This is just for educational purposes. All right, well, let's go ahead and close the voting and see how people have answered.
Great.
So there you can see most people have named one, even if they may have just done it in the last few minutes. But still, they've already checked that box if they've done it. And then for those folks who said no or not sure, that's something that they can address relatively easily.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations for the 86%. And for those that aren't, I'm sure you'll be naming somebody or running back to the office manager and telling them you need to do that right now.
All right. Well, let's look then at what one of the things that the compliance officer is going to be tasked with sort of managing, and that's the security risk analysis. What's involved and why do people have to do it?
So, yeah, the security risk analysis is required, and it's Section 164.308, A1, 2A, and that's that's where you can find it. If you want to Google it right now, you can hop on there, and it's going to tell you that you need to perform a risk analysis. It is the first step that the compliance officer is going to take, and it's a fundamental step in becoming compliant. The risk analysis is basically a roadmap for your office to become HIPAA compliant. It's interesting because it can be a lot of work, and I say it can be if you make it. But really, HIPAA put this in place to give you an opportunity to understand and uncover the potential risks and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the EPHI, or PHI. Actually, it doesn't have to be electronic protected health information, really of any protected health information. And so I hear a lot of people talk about the risk analysis like it's this awful, horrible thing that I have to do as a covered entity or a dental office. And in fact, Brian, really, I think it's an opportunity. And because I know that a lot of offices, even when I walked into my office, when I was running it, it wasn't fully compliant. And so by doing this risk analysis, again, it's a roadmap, and it uncovers a lot of potential risks. And the greatest part about it is, if you name a security compliance officer and you do a security risk analysis, in the eyes of HIPAA, you are probably, and maybe, Brian, you could answer this, but you're probably 75% ahead of a lot of other offices.
Yeah, I think that's right. Doing a robust risk analysis and having a security officer, unfortunately, a lot of folks haven't taken those steps, and those are really, like you're saying, that's the roadmap to compliance.
Yeah, and what's scary is if you ever had a disgruntled employee or a patient, which I know, at least most of us have had one that just wasn't happy, they find out that maybe for some reason they don't feel that you treated their information correctly, and they do give that information to HHS. Those are the first two things that an audit is going to uncover. They're going to walk into your office and they're going to say, "Who's your security compliance officer?" And then they're going to say, "Okay, show me your last risk analysis." First two questions. If you can't answer those, you're in trouble. So again, this is not to scare you or anything like that, but get these two things done, and you're going to be far ahead of a lot of other offices. And really, you're doing what you need to do anyway. So at the bottom here, the last part of this slide, I did give you a nice little acronym if you'd like to use it, but really the way I look at it is you perform the risk analysis, you assess the information that it tells you that you need to, and then you implement the tasks that need to be taken to protect the information, and then you continue to review it. So I tell you that now because I'm going to go into the actual risk assessment, the risk analysis a little bit more, and tell you some of the things that you want to look for. But think about those things: perform it, assess, implement, and review. And by the way, you heard me slip up there. I said risk assessment, and that's because you'll hear it both ways. The actual the law says it uses the word analysis, but you'll see risk assessment out there from time to time. So they are synonymous, or the same thing. So really, what you need to look for when you do your risk analysis, there are those three safeguards that we touched on a little bit earlier. And again, they are administrative, physical, and technical. And so the risk analysis kind of dives into each one of these to make sure you're doing what you need to do. The risk analysis is going to tell you what you need to evaluate and whether action is quote-unquote required or if it is addressable. So the risk analysis has a series of questions, and it may ask you, do you have a backup plan in place? And what it's going to say is that is required. And so you need to write down what your backup plan is. If it says that it's addressable, which having a backup plan is not addressable, but if it did, addressable basically means that it's not optional. Okay, addressable does not mean that it's optional. Rather, it means that if you as a covered entity cannot implement it because maybe, let's say, it's too costly, or maybe it just doesn't apply to you, or you don't think it applies to you, then you need to write down and document why it is not reasonable and appropriate for you to adopt the measure that it's telling you, is required, or I guess not required, but is suggested and not optional. So it's not so obvious, and to some extent it's a little bit hard to explain. But again, we do have a Q&A here, so at the end, if you have questions about that, I'm more than happy to answer them. But there's really two things you need to look at: it's required or it's addressable. So there are a lot of companies out there that can help you, perform a risk analysis or risk assessment. As an IT provider, generally most IT providers do not take on the full liability of performing a full risk assessment for you. But as an IT provider, and I can say this because we will help our clients take care of the technical safeguards and answer questions for them. From that standpoint, your IT provider should be able to help you with this, specifically the technical safeguards. I do believe that Format Approved offers an opportunity for them to help you with the risk analysis and go through and make sure your administrative and physical and technical safeguards are are there and that you perform the risk analysis. So
I would just add to this what you said before, that when you're looking at those physical, technical, and administrative safeguards, that that's the security rule, and that can seem overwhelming. If someone sits down and tries to read through the security rule, it's like, how could we possibly do this? And the answer is the risk analysis, because the risk analysis, you have expert guidance going through it and answering each of those points. And so then when you come out of it, then you know that you're in compliance with the security rule. Whereas if you just, sat down with this stack of regulations, it might seem impossible. Risk analysis is really the way that you get that done.
Absolutely. And a lawyer could do that, but let's be honest, we all hate lawyers. and nobody wants to sit there and read over that. So those risk analyses are really helpful. They ask questions. It just asks questions, and you can plug through it pretty quick.
So let's talk about what's involved in securing a provider's technology. Or were we going to ask another? It looks like I skipped a polling question. Let's see if folks have actually done the risk analysis. Is it time to ask that question there, Matt?
Yeah, no, that would be great. I'd be interested to see what the response is there.
All right, if you could take just a moment to answer this question.
And I love the last option there. Yes, but it was a long time ago. Right? That's great because it does require you. HIPAA doesn't say when you have to. It does say you have to do it, but once you do it, it doesn't tell you how often you have to do it. It's kind of an ongoing thing that you need to keep your eye on. That's why there's a security compliance officer, and that's part of what they do.
But it's probably safe to say that if you haven't done one since 2005, you really need to take another look at that.
Absolutely.
All right, I'll give you just another few seconds. Let's go ahead and look at the results then. There you can see.
Okay. That's a good spread, and kind of actually, to be honest with you, what I was expecting, and actually there's more yeses than I had expected. So for those of you that haven't, certainly feel free to reach out to us. I know that Brian will probably go over a little maybe the opportunities that are available to get a risk analysis performed if you do need help. But I appreciate your responses there.
All right, now let's go on to the next slide. All right, so, when it comes to the technology and as an IT service provider, this is definitely, something that you work with every day. What's involved in securing a provider's technology?
Yeah, well, honestly, there's a lot, and as strange as it sounds, I don't want to have to dive into a ton of it. And really, that's because this isn't supposed to be a sales presentation. So there's a lot that we do, and from running my own dental practice, I will tell you that to be compliant, it is almost impossible to do all this on your own. Having an IT provider doing this for you is extremely helpful. But here's 5 things that I recommend and that we look at as an IT provider, that we do for our clients. So the first one is securing your devices, and that sounds pretty obvious, and it is a bit ambiguous, but there are a couple things that are really big. The first one is obvious and it's very basic, but it's using passwords. And it is part of the requirement to make sure that you don't have unauthorized users on your machines or where there's PHI. So just as a quick guide, a solid password, and I'd like you guys to maybe do this as I'm talking about it, is think about a good password. It's 8 characters in length. It contains an upper and lowercase letters, contains at least one number, and at least one special character. So I'm not sure what you're using personally or obviously at the office here, but that's what we tell our clients to do, so that they don't, so there's no breach just because of a password. Now, I will tell you, and total transparency here, because I know a lot of our clients are on here as well, is that the machines that don't actually contain any PHI, sometimes when we set them up, we will use maybe a generic password like staff123. But we never, ever counsel our clients ever to use a generic password like that for, let's say, their practice management system. If you're using a generic password like that for your practice management system, change it now. Figure it out, because if you don't, there's big problems. Obviously, you can track, who's using the machine as well, which is very important when you change the passwords. But that's very basic, and probably a lot of you are already doing it.
And the reason why, just to interject quickly, Matt, excuse me, is that otherwise it's too easy for, through brute force, a machine to guess what a password is. That's the rationale, right? If you just have some simple password.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I mean, a lot of, like I said, if you use, an address or whatever, I think there's some information out there probably on Google. What are the most used passwords?
Right.
ABC123. Somebody can immediately get right on a computer if they wanted to that way. So, and the next really cool thing from HIPAA is this encryption that I want to talk about. And there was, I believe, Format Approved had a lunch and learn a little bit more on encryption. But real quick, basically what HIPAA has said, and HITECH, and then the omnibus rule really clarified this, is if you encrypt your devices and it's lost or stolen, well, if it's encrypted with certain standards in place, it's not considered a breach, and you don't have to report it. So if you have a laptop and your IT provider has encrypted that laptop, and you leave it, let's say at the mall or something like that, which of course you shouldn't be on your laptop at the mall with patient information on it, but if you were, you don't have to notify the HHS, the Health and Human Services, of that breach because it's been encrypted. So it's really cool, and if you want more information on encrypting, I would certainly recommend that you contact your technology provider and talk to them about some of the encryption tools that are out there. But that's really neat. And also, hey, look, even if you do have a password open and the device, and they get into the device, but the information inside of it's encrypted and they can't read it, then you're not, you technically don't have a breach. So that's something to look at down the road, but that was really in this omnibus rule in 2013. They really kind of clarified that. There is more information. I can go more in depth about it, but moving on here. Current security software. The next thing is making sure that you have antivirus and anti-malware in place. It needs to be updated, current, and configured properly. So that's the big one, is that a lot of people out there have antivirus, and a lot of offices have purchased one of the big 3 antivirus programs, software out there, and it's running on their computers, and it is really crippling their network. And the reason why is because a anti-malware is built so that it basically blocks information incoming and outgoing because it doesn't want to infect the computer. Well, let's be honest, in the dental office, if you're using technology at all, you are sending and having incoming information constantly. And if something continually blocks the information coming in or is trying to block it and read it, you're slowing down your computer. So when we hear people, we have prospects and clients, when we walk into their door, they're using some antivirus, and they're like, oh, our computers are so slow. Well, immediately we take a look at the antivirus they're using. We take that one off, put ours on, and it has specific exceptions that allow information to transfer in and out. So it's not just about having antivirus, it's about having it managed properly. I used a simple explanation here that an antivirus is taken to having basically your gates of your castle up, and you let in who you want into your castle, and then let people out when they need to go out. An antivirus, though, won't protect against employees going on to sites like Facebook or worse, other harmful sites. It can't protect against that. And so I kind of think of that as having one of your team members letting somebody in the back door when they shouldn't be going in there, or having like a catapult shoot over the gates, and you can't protect against that. The antivirus is really there as really kind of a first line of defense. So the bottom line is you need an antivirus, and you need somebody to manage it so that you know which exceptions need to be had so you can still continue to work properly. The other one is business class email. You need to make sure that you're not using Gmail, AOL, or Yahoo, or any one of those free email systems. The bottom line is they have access to your information. There's basically no privacy on those free hosted sites. And if you're going to send PHI via email, you have to use a secure email system. No exceptions. Without it, you've got Google diving into your information and searching through it so they know where to advertise to you on. We do offer a secure email system. It's called Secure DDS. It's exclusive to our clients. And so, if you do want more information on secure email, obviously feel free to contact us. The other one here is the business class firewall. A firewall is basically a gateway to your network. So it's a little bit similar to an antivirus, but it's really that it comes before the antivirus. The antivirus is on your server and your workstation. The firewall is what happens first before any information gets in there. So the way I kind of look at the firewall is it would be like, let's say, the moat or the outer gates of the castle before anything even gets in. Having a firewall goes a long way. I'll be honest with you. Some of the smaller practices, they can run anywhere between $600 and $1,000 depending on what you get. It may not be economically possible for you to do that, but really, if you have, I'm just throwing this out there, if you probably have 8 operatories, you probably need a firewall. And the last one here is secure remote access. I know a lot of offices, either have workers going home or the doctor is going home. I know there's a lot of cloud-based practice management systems out there. You just need to make sure that those are secure and encrypted when information is being sent back and forth. And if you're using something like, GoToMyPC, that's what we use for our clients. That is a solid and reliable network. But some of the free remote access, I would be very careful with that. Again, when you start using free stuff, there's a reason why it's free. Likely because they have access to some sort of information there. And I've ran a practice, so I don't want you to have to pay for something you don't need. But let's be honest, generally when it's free, there's a reason. So those are the big 5 in terms of securing the technology. And one thing I didn't mention was most of the breaches are actually due to theft. And so in terms of securing your devices, the encryption goes along with this. But just make sure you don't leave your laptop in your car when you go to the mall, or leave it at the mall. Just lock it down and know where it is, because that's where a lot of the breaches happen. So.
Absolutely. And, this point about using business class email, I think is an important one, too, because we hear all the time from folks who are using free email. And, in fact, I have to confess that one of my own doctors has sent me stuff through a Gmail account. And, I think people aren't really aware that that's not permissible. So let's just take another polling question and see how many folks may be using free email services. It's the most natural thing in the world because we use these in our personal lives. So I think a lot of folks may not realize that that's a problem, but it really is something that violates HIPAA. If you can take just a moment to vote. On the one hand, we want providers to be able to communicate with their patients. It shouldn't all just be faxes in this day and age. But if you're going to use email, it really needs to be secure email, certainly if you're going to include any PHI in that email. All right, it looks like folks are voting. I'll give you just another few seconds again. It's interesting to see kind of the array of answers. Let's go ahead and share those results so folks can see what the terrain looks like here. A lot of folks don't, but then some are using free mail, and some are trying to be careful about how they use it.
Okay, sure, absolutely. And I'll just say this: look, I use Gmail for my personal email.
So do I.
Use it for work. You know,
right?
I do
That's
not
right.
use it for work. You, as a dental provider, have way too much on the line to be using Gmail or Yahoo or AOL. That was one of the first things that we did when I walked into my practice. Just, get Outlook, get Office 365 from Microsoft. Something, yeah, you got to pay a little bit of money for it, but I think it may be like $4 a month for a mailbox. That's what we use, Office 365, and then ours actually, if you type secure into the subject line, it actually automatically encrypts it. It reads the word secure, automatically encrypts it, sends it to the intended recipient. I guess the bottom line is, look, you can use it for your personal use. Don't use it for business. It's really not that professional, and then second of all, it's not compliant. So we'll leave it at that.
All right, so let's talk about the the backup and recovery plan. And I love this one because I think there's very little awareness that this is a requirement, and I think a lot of folks have not taken care of this. So please tell us about what the requirement is.
Yeah, Brian, you're right. So the requirement is in Section 164.308, A7 little I, and basically what it says is that you need to establish policies and procedures for responding to emergencies or other occurrence. And it even says this, for example, fire, vandalism, system failure, natural disaster. The damage a system that contain electronic protected health information. So this is specific to a disaster and backup recovery plan as it relates to the technology side of it. When we go into a lot of offices, they may be using like a tape drive, or they back up like with a USB and they take it home and it's not encrypted, and they're running around, and to some extent they have a backup recovery plan, but it's disjointed. There can be failure points, and it's kind of scary to have people, some employees, walk around with all the EPHI on this little USB drive or this tape drive, which is pretty archaic at this point. But really nowadays, what we have, at least here at Advantage Technologies, is we use two-tiered backup. And the first is we have a local drive that's hooked onto the server that is encrypted in case anybody does rip it out. And so you have your local backup there on an encrypted drive that you can always take with you if you want, but the beauty of it is you don't have to take it home at night. And when I was running a practice, oh my gosh, I was so scared of people taking stuff home. It was like, I don't want anybody taking anything home. I want to keep it here in my office, and it's encrypted. So I loved that. And the other thing is, I'm sure everybody's heard about this cloud thing, but basically it's nothing more than basically saving the PHI in a secure and encrypted. It's actually 5 locations that ours is in. It's geo-redundant, and so what happens is we encrypt every night, and our clients get a confirmation that backup has happened. So for our clients, when they do the risk analysis and they say, okay, do we have a backup and disaster recovery plan? Pretty much they can say yes, call Advantage Technologies at this number. We have that in place, but truly it is a requirement. And Brian, I love it too, because like I said, it not only hits on being compliant with HIPAA, but my gosh, imagine if there was a disaster and you didn't have anything in place, you're out of business for a while. This actually requires you to do it. So there's really 3 requirements. The data backup plan and the disaster recovery plan, which kind of go hand in hand. And then the third one, which is an emergency mode operation plan, which says that if there is an emergency, you need to have a procedure in place for you to get back up and running. And just total transparency here, look, for a lot of the dental offices, yeah, you want to get back up and running immediately. But, if you don't have a generator and you don't have the ability to basically virtualize a server and get it back up and running in 5 minutes, which we can do here, it does cost some money to do that. So it may take a day or may take a few hours to get back up and running, but the bottom line is you have this operation plan. For hospitals, they have tons of generators and they're back up and running in minutes, and you've probably seen that when power goes out. So bottom line is it's required for you to have that emergency plan. The last thing, which is really kind of cool, is it's actually an addressable part of the safeguard, and that is to have a testing and revision procedure. So once you have your data backup plan, and I really love this too, is this term or this phrase is the time to test is not when the disaster happens. Okay, you don't want to test when you get hit by a tornado. You want to test before it to make sure that everything's going to basically repopulate and work properly when you have to get back up and running. So at Advantage Technologies, and I know some of the other IT providers do this, they'll actually provide basically backup disaster restore simulations. What we do is we put all the information on another server in-house, we crash the system, and then we basically build it back up and make sure that you are back up and running. So we do that simulation on an annual basis with our top tier plan, and then if some of our other clients want it ongoing, or if they're on the 2 lower plans, they can ask us to do that, and we'll do that on an hourly rate. But really, it's addressable. So what that says is it's not optional, but you do need to write down in your risk analysis, how you're taking care of it or why you're not taking care of it, maybe because it's too expensive or whatever. So that is, in the most part, that is the backup and disaster recovery plan.
That's very cool that you can actually test it that way in a simulated environment. That's really, I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, it's kind of fun for our techies.
I'll bet.
They love it. Yeah. So I did want to mention one last quick thing is I would be careful on the Dropbox, Google Drive, Carbonite, some of the other backups that are out there. I know a lot of before they become clients of ours, a lot of the offices are using something like that. It's important that it's managed. And so for us, we obviously manage those backups and obviously send confirmations. The Dropbox and Google Drive, again, maybe some other people have access to that, and that's just kind of scary. So, it's best to have an IT provider manage your backup. And the last thing is, whoever's doing your backup, if you're having a third party do that, sure you have a business associate agreement with them.
Right.
Because they have your data. And just make sure you have one. We have one for all of our clients. If you don't have one, even if it's like with Carbonite, I don't know if Carbonite's going to give you one, which is an online backup system. I don't know if they're going to give you one, but you better ask for one.
The last I saw, Carbonite was not signing business associate agreements. It's been a while since I've looked. That is a great point. People really need to be careful of that. Dropbox will not, for instance, Dropbox won't sign a business associate agreement. So if you're using Dropbox to back up PHI, that's a breach. You have to have, whoever's doing it, they have to sign that business associate agreement.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and we can talk about that more. I know we're running pretty close on time, and I apologize. Some of the slides have taken a little bit longer, but if you have questions about that, I'm more than happy to cover those. Or maybe Brian can invite me back sometime if I did okay.
We'd love to have you back. There's always more to talk about when it comes to HIPAA, but this is a great, covering these practical steps is absolutely wonderful. So let's talk about the last of your 5 points, and that's the requirement for providing HIPAA training. I think this is another one that sometimes surprises people, that they have to be trained on HIPAA.
Sure. Well, you all are here because obviously you wanted some information on HIPAA and what's happening, what you need to do. But the standard to provide training for your team members is found in Section 164.530 B1. Again, if you want to Google it, have fun, go find it. You can read all about it. But basically, it says you need to train all the members of your workforce on the policies and procedures with respect to protected health information. All of your employees. I want to make sure that's really clear. All of your employees that have access to protected health information. In a dental office, I'm probably going to venture to guess, this is the way it was in mine, every single one of your employees has access to it. Actually, maybe our accountant didn't. But other than that, pretty much everybody does. So one important thing, we hired a lot of new people at my practice. We have 6 locations. You need to make sure you're training those new hires in quote-unquote a reasonable time after the person joins. I'm going to throw this out there as a reasonable time period. I can't say this is what HIPAA thinks, but train them within a week or 2. And we'll talk about some of the training methods down here, but train them within a week or 2. The next part is document the training. If you're getting the training through like a third party, like Format Approved or another company, they do actually give them certificates, and there's documentation that you can just take them, put them in their file. If you're not using a company like that and you're training them on their own, then you need to have some sort of documentation, a simple Word document, having them sign it at the date. So in terms of the training programs, obviously we're here with Format Approved. They're hosting the webinar here today. They do provide training. Advantage Technologies has partnered with Format Approved to provide training to our clients and others. There's really two main trainings for a dental office that I would say that you need to do. That's the security officers. You need to have a certified HIPAA security professional. If you take that training, that will get you a great start, obviously, and then I'll talk about the risk analysis. The other training is for your employees, and at least through Format Approved, what they call it is HIPAA Workforce Certificate, and that is for your team members. I'm gonna put a shout out there because I know one of the biggest things is, oh my gosh, it's going to cost me so much money to train everybody. The workforce training, I believe, is like $35 through Format Approved, and I know Brian's going to talk about a little bit about some of the discounts and things for attending the webinar that you can get. So it's not expensive, and you need to do it. And I'll tell you, just from me running that practice as a CEO, it kind of makes your employees feel important. The fact that you really care about giving them training, and they can take that certificate with them and own that and understand something. So I'll leave the training at that. And Brian, I appreciate you having me on here today.
Yeah, well,
we'll for questions for a couple minutes. So.
We'll talk a little bit more about the training here at the end of our session and how you can get discounts on that. But yeah, as far as the workforce goes and people who are just part of your team who need the training, really it can be very practical. It's not difficult to do. It's focused on pragmatic things to protect that information, and that's why it's important. They need to have a basic understanding of what HIPAA says they need to do, but then more than that, it's really focused on how do you actually protect the information from a practical perspective. And so a couple of hours of training can make a world of difference in terms of actually complying with what the law requires. But before we move on and talk a little bit about what you can do to meet some of this, let's just ask one final polling question and see whether folks have had all of their staff members trained on their HIPAA obligations. So if you can take just a moment to vote, it's always interesting to us to just get a kind of snapshot of where people are in their own compliance and whether they've done everything that HIPAA requires. Give you just a few more seconds. We're running a little short on time, but thank you for staying with us here as we go through these requirements. Let's go ahead and look at what the results are. It looks like a lot of folks have done their training, so that's great. And some have not, or they're not quite sure whether they've done it. Just be aware this is something that you really need to do on an annual basis just to make sure that everybody understands what they need to do to be compliant. All right, so just to sum up, these are the 5 steps that you talked about today, Matt, and I think this is great practical advice. Like, cut to the chase. What do I need to do? These 5 steps. If everybody does these 5 steps, then they're going to be in great shape in terms of meeting what the law requires.
Absolutely. If I knew this when I walked into my practice, this was stuff that I just spend my time and effort, kind of learning. But really, take these 5 steps, do them. We already asked you if you named a security compliance officer. If you didn't earlier, I hope by now we're at the end of the hour. You better have one named, and if you don't have one named now, you better have one named by the end of the day. And then let's talk about getting the risk analysis performed. And if you have questions about your technology, call an IT provider. There is a group called the Dental Integrators Association. They are spread throughout the country. Our president is actually the president of the Dental Integrators Association. But they can help you. They work with dental offices. Again, that is the Dental Integrators Association. They work with dental offices on technology. Have a backup and disaster recovery plan, not only to be compliant, but also for your business. And the last one is conduct training. So that's all I have, and I really appreciate you guys being here.
That's great practical advice, and thank you so much for joining us today. Matt, this has been a great presentation. We've had a couple comments from the audience along those lines as well. I know it's really been useful to people, so thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, you can see Matt's contact information on your screen there. So if you have questions, and some of you did ask questions that we haven't had a chance to get to, we're going to pass those on to Matt, and he'll respond to you by email. But feel free to write Matt at matt.lamaster@adv-tech.com. And you can also check out Advantage Technologies by going to the URL there, adv-tech.com, to learn about their services, or give them a call if you'd like. So thank you again, Matt, for joining us. I'd like to thank our attendees as well. Remember that if you got something out of this session, we're going to send you an email with slides and with the recorded version of this event so you can share it with other folks. Matt talked earlier about the training and the special discount we're able to offer. So if you are interested in looking at our training, the training that ForMed Approved offers, you can go to that URL there, formedtraining.com, click on HIPAA and compliance, and you can see the two options there are that CHSP for the security officer and then the HWCP for staff members. If you use the discount code ADVTech20 during checkout, you can take a 20% discount off of that training. So that brings the workforce license down to $28. Certainly very affordable. Again, if you have questions about the risk analysis, feel free to contact Matt. That is something that we also are able to help with here at ForMed Approved. We also are happy to answer questions about HIPAA just in general. So feel free to go onto our website and click on the live chat button or to email Matt. We're always happy to answer those questions. Keep an eye on your email box on our homepage for other upcoming Learning Lunch topics. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. It's been a great session.